So you guys wanted to know more about the accusations against Sean Diddy Combs. And wow, this indictment really paints a picture that clashes with, the image we're used to seeing of him.
Yeah, it's really something. You have this like larger than life persona Diddy's cultivated, all about success and extravagance, right? And then these charges hit, and they're heavy stuff. We're talking sex trafficking, racketeering accusations that paint a very dark picture.
And it just feels even more serious with him being held without bail at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. I mean, that place has housed some big names. R. Kelly, Ghislaine Maxwell. It all adds to the weight of what's going on. So to start at the beginning, what exactly happened that led to Diddy's arrest?
Okay, so on September 16th, Diddy was arrested in Manhattan. What the prosecutors are alleging is disturbing. They're saying there's this pattern of him using his money, his power, to pressure people, a lot of them trying to make it as artists or models, into sex work.
And it's not just vague claims, right? The indictment gets very specific, even graphic, about what's alleged to have happened. Like, there's mention of these freak-offs. Can you explain what the prosecution says went down at these events?
Right, so the prosecution is alleging that these freak-offs, they were basically drug-fueled orgies that Diddy organized. And allegedly, he used employees to deal with all the logistics, like finding locations, getting everything together. This included, and this is where it gets kind of wild, a huge amount of baby oil and lubricant, which they later found at his properties.
We have to emphasize here, these are still accusations. Diddy has pleaded not guilty to all of this. But the prosecution does seem to be building a case on a lot of digital evidence. They've seized tons of stuff. Over 90 cell phones, laptops, storage devices, the works. What does this tell us about their strategy?
I think the sheer volume of digital evidence points to the prosecution going for what you might call a digital trial. Basically, they're going to rely heavily on electronic data to back up witness testimonies, show patterns of behavior, and maybe shoot down anything the defense says that contradicts their story. They've also sent out hundreds of subpoenas, like a crazy number, to tech companies and banks. This is a thorough investigation.
So we could be talking text messages, emails, online payments, maybe even social media posts, all being used as evidence.
Exactly. And that makes things a lot trickier for Diddy's defense team. It's one thing to deal with physical evidence or someone saying they saw something, but a digital trail, that's a lot harder to argue against.
And speaking of his defense, it seems like Diddy's gone all in on getting a legal team with, let's say, a very particular set of skills. What can you tell us about his lawyers and their approach to all this?
Oh, he's definitely lawyered up. We're talking a legal dream team here. Attorneys who've worked on huge cases, police brutality, even representing Sam Bankman-Fried in that whole cryptocurrency scandal. This is a team that knows how to handle a messy, high-profile legal fight.
You mentioning the Sam Bankman-Fried case is interesting. Do you see any parallels between the two, especially in terms of how digital evidence might be used or even the strategies for, managing the public's perception?
It's a good point. Both situations involve a massive amount of digital evidence that has to be analyzed and potentially shown in court.
So while Diddy's lawyers are adamant about his innocence, they seem to be taking a nuanced approach to defending him. For example, they've tried to downplay the seriousness of those freak-offs we talked about.
You're right. Diddy's lawyer actually went as far as calling them, get this, threesomes. They've also disputed how many bottles of baby oil were found, saying the prosecution's exaggerating. It seems like they're trying to tone down the more, shall we say, sensational aspects of the accusations, all while getting ready for the legal battle ahead.
It's going to be interesting to see how that strategy works out in court. But before we get too deep into the legal back and forth, let's unpack what Diddy's actually facing here, what the potential consequences are, and what his attempts to get bail tell us about the challenges he has ahead. So we know Diddy's legal team has already tried twice to get him out on bail. They even offered a crazy amount, like $50 million, but the judge wasn't having it. What makes this case serious enough to deny bail, even with that kind of money on the line?
Well, you have to remember, bail isn't just about the money. It's about the judge looking at the whole picture and deciding if there's too much risk in letting the person out before trial. They think about how serious the accusations are, whether the person might try to mess with witnesses or if they might just disappear to avoid the whole thing. In Diddy's case, the prosecution is basically saying he's got the money and the means to do just that, especially with how serious these charges are.
And they're using Diddy's past behavior against him too, right? Like that incident back in 2016 with his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura.
Exactly. The prosecution keeps bringing up how he was accused of assault then and how he allegedly tried to bribe security at the hotel to cover it up. They're using it to argue that he might try to obstruct justice again, maybe influence witnesses, things like that.
So even with top-notch lawyers and a ton of cash, he's stuck for now. But his team's filed an appeal, right? What are the chances of that actually working?
An appeal in this situation means they're saying the first judge messed up, that they made a mistake by denying bail, maybe they didn't apply the law right or something. It gets complicated. And to be honest, the success rate for these appeals is all over the place. It's hard to say for sure.
But his lawyers, having handled those police brutality cases, even representing Sam Bankman-Fried in his appeal, they must be pretty well prepared for this.
Oh, absolutely. This is their wheelhouse. They know how this works, how to fight a case like this, deal with the media frenzy, argue these complicated legal points to the appeals court. You can bet they're going over everything with a fine-tooth comb, looking for any little thing they could use to their advantage.
And on top of all that, there's the whole thing about Diddy potentially testifying for himself.
Yeah, talk about a gamble. On the one hand, being able to speak directly to the jury, tell his side, connect with them on a personal level, that could be powerful. But it's also risky. It opens him up to cross-examination by the prosecution, which can get brutal. They could easily backfire and hurt his case more than it helps.
Sounds like his legal team has a real puzzle on their hands, trying to find the right balance. They've got to address the serious charges, deal with all the potential evidence, and somehow present a defense that's actually convincing. It's a lot.
Absolutely. They need to poke holes in the prosecution's story, create some doubt, but they also have to manage how the public sees all of this. And they've got to be thinking ahead, anticipating how certain arguments might play out in front of a jury. It's a delicate balancing act, for sure.
And this whole thing, it's not just a legal battle, is it? It brings up these bigger questions about power dynamics, exploitation, especially within the music industry.
100%. This situation really highlights how easy it is for abuse to happen when you have these huge power imbalances. And it's not just in music, right?
Yeah.
Any field where one person or group has a lot of sway, there's potential for that power to be misused.
It feels especially relevant in light of the #MeToo movement, where we've seen this push to hold people accountable for how they use and abuse their power, especially in places like Hollywood or the entertainment industry in general. And it feels like maybe the music industry hasn't really had its #MeToo moment yet, Like we haven't seen the same level of scrutiny and accountability as in Hollywood, for example. Could this case change that, do you think?
It's definitely possible, right? I mean, the #MeToo movement really proved that these conversations about power, consent, what's acceptable, they need to happen everywhere. The music industry can't just get a pass. I think no matter what happens with this case, just the fact that it's happening could change how the industry deals with these issues going forward.
We've seen it before, though, haven't we? Big public figures get hit with serious accusations, and sometimes their careers are fine, sometimes they're totally over. It's hard to predict. How do you think this will play out for Diddy, especially with his image, his whole brand being so carefully crafted?
Right, and that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Diddy built an empire. His brand is all about success, charisma, a certain lifestyle. How this case affects all that, his businesses, even his legacy, it's really up in the air. But I think it shows how what we see in public and what happens in court, they don't always match up. And sometimes how the public reacts matters just as much as any legal decision.
It makes you think, too, about that gap between the persona, like someone like Diddy projects, and who they actually are behind the scenes.
Totally. It reminds us that even with all the fame and money, celebrities are still human, right? They're capable of amazing things, but like these accusations suggest, maybe not so great things, too. We have to remember to look past the image, the stories we're told, and really think critically about these situations.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, and it's obvious this story is far from over. Diddy's back in court October 9th, and we'll be watching to see what happens.
Definitely one to keep an eye on. It'll be interesting to see the evidence, how the legal teams handle it all, and of course what the jury ultimately decides.
And for everyone listening, as we follow this case, it's a good time to think about our own role in all of this, as fans, as consumers of music and celebrity culture. Are we holding these icons accountable? Are we listening to the people who are brave enough to come forward with accusations? And are we willing to have those tough conversations about power and accountability, even when they involve people we might admire? Something to think about.